Today we're going to be talking about reactive forms. So my talk's title has different variations. I've just put, let's put a form on it. So it doesn't really say much, but I'll tell you. So without further ado, let's begin. So who am I? My name is Sani Yusuf, and just like the great gentleman said. And I'm coming all the way from London. So I'm actually Nigerian originally, but I've been living in London for the past decade. And in case you don't know where Nigeria is, a little country in West Africa. You might have gotten emails from my cousins, things like that. But yeah, so I'm a Google developer expert as well in web and Angular. And has anybody not seen the movie called Avatar? And by the way, when I say Avatar, I'm talking about like the blue people, not that other nonsense, the real one. So I'm like an absolute like fan. I went to Disneyland, and we had 3 hours on the queue to go to Avatar. I was educating everybody to the degree that they actually gave me a card. So I really love the movie. If you haven't seen it, we cannot be friends. I'm easy to find online. You can find me at Sani Yusuf everywhere. If you find anyone using that username that is not half as ugly as I am, let me know so I can sue them. All right, are we ready to begin? We all good? Okay, that's it. Let's do it the Aussie way. So let's talk a little bit about forms. Hands up if you work with forms in your office. And hands up if you don't have a job. Okay, good. Everybody works with forms, right? Exactly. Forms are really, really interesting because they're one of the features that we sort of like miss, or we don't really, how do I say, we tend to not give them the love that they deserve, or we tend to not give them the attention. But the thing is about forms is that you actually use them every single day. You use them every single day. If you think you haven't used up to 10 forms today, let me see your hands up. At every single point in time, you've actually used a form in one way or the other, every single day. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some forms, some things that you may have not even realized that they are actually forms. So let's have a look at some of these things. Who knows that guy? That form right there was made very popular by a very interesting man somewhere in America who tends to give us whether the world is going to burn or not every day. So there's that form. And then you have this form. It never occurred to you that it was a form, right? Why? Because when forms work, we don't think of them as forms. But when they don't work, that's when we remember their forms. This is the world's most expensive form. This is a $700 billion form. It's very expensive. But it's literally one input field. Without this one input field, there is no business. There is no 40,000 employees. There is no companies all across like countless of continents. Just this one form. And then there's this guy that we forget as a form. This is a form that pretty much everyone in here at some point has used. If you haven't used this particular form, I'll be really worried for you. But this is a form that every single person has used when you dial a number, right? And then, does anybody know what this form is signifying? Any guess? This is the address bar. Every day you go on a browser, and how do you get to a website? You put something on the address bar. What is the address bar? It's just a text field. It's a form. Again, the reason why a lot of us, I'm seeing some expressions because a lot of us, it's just hitting like, oh yeah, that's a form. It's because when forms work, we don't think of them as forms. But when they don't work, that's when we remember. And forms are something like, they're software pieces that have the ability to extend our humanity. When a form is working, it's almost like it's a part of you. It's sort of like when you're driving a car that you really like. When like something is wrong with the car, it's almost like you can feel it. You can be like, my left tire is not in, like, if there's a sound, you can almost like feel it because it's a part of you. That's how close you get to the machine. And that's kind of how forms do. So if the form is stressful, you do feel that stress. If a car is difficult to drive, you tend to feel it, right? So, and then this form, probably the most annoying form in the world, where people get to tell you that they're having a shower or they're about to take a dump, something like that, things you don't really care about. But this form, and without this form, very powerful form too, you can fiddle around with some elections if you can. I didn't say it. Forms have the ability to make or break your business. literally. If your forms are difficult to fill, to collect user information, that could literally destroy, or well, not destroy, but make your business suffer. Think about the things that we use with forms. Think about when you are filing taxes. Think about when you go to even the lift, right? Those things you press, they're forms. Do you know how the word radio button came to be? Because back in the days, you know, the old radio cars, it was actually a button you press, like click, click, and that's kind of what it is in software. It's also one at a time. So forms can make or break your business. If you have really terrible forms, you're in for a really, really steep hill climb. So before we get into, you know, why forms are great or anything, why don't we see some really terrible forms, all right? These are some great forms. And guess what? A lot of you would have already seen these forms in your day-to-day life. So let's see the first one here, right? And it's let me make my damn mistake first. Can anybody guess what is going on here? Just, yes, sir?
Fields are invalid because you haven't touched them yet.
Exactly. So I've just landed on this website. Okay, I just want to fill my information, you know, to give somebody some money. And the form field is already crying out, like, hey, you're doing something wrong. And I'm like, wait, what? I haven't actually made any mistake yet. I haven't done anything. I've just landed on the form. I haven't focused on any input field, but it's already saying, give me your password. Put a username that's 8 characters long. Make sure it's got a number. Like, just give me a minute. Let me actually make the mistake first, right? So that's it. And by the way, every single form that I'm going to demo, there's a link. And when I share the slides, you have a stack blitz link that's going to show you the exact code and the HTML, JavaScript, and be built in Angular for that. So let's see another one. This one is don't let me submit if I'm doing something wrong. I guess the title is giving it away. What do you think is wrong there? Exactly. You're going to fill this form field, and it's going to let you submit. It's going to go to the server side, and it's going to come back needlessly. So you're like, oh, look, I've submitted this form correctly, and it's going to come back and give you one error message, which kind of, this would have been nice if you had told me ahead of time. You know, so be clear with information that is mandatory. I normally follow the pattern where I only make the optional fields visible. So the fields that are optional, I mark them as optional, while the rest are inferred as mandatory, or just put a little star or something like that. That's better because most of the time you don't tend to have a lot of optional fields in a form. But if you do, there are ways you can arrange the form. But generally, I prefer to just make the optional field, I mark them as optional. So you know this is optional, while the rest, you just they're implied as mandatory. There are some times when this doesn't really work, this sort of thing where you need to, you have a call to action button or acquisition button. So maybe you want somebody to sign in a newsletter, right? You're not going to disable the submit button. You really need their email. I mean, how else are you going to run the business, right? So in times like that, this pattern doesn't really apply. Now, there's this one, which is focus on what I'm currently doing wrong, right? What is happening here is it's asking me for my first name, my last name, my password, and my email. I've decided, for whatever reason, because maybe I was drunk, that I want to fill my last name first. But the form is complaining that I haven't given it my first name. I'm like, do you want my information or not? It's like, I should get to decide how I want to give you my information. Your job is to just collect it. It doesn't really matter. Think about it in an examination, like where you're supposed to fill something. And if you decide to like maybe fill it the other way around and like you get marked down, it's like, it wouldn't make any sense. So why should it apply to forms? And of course, it's always important because what you need to know is a user can only interact with one form field at a time. You don't have two cursors. I mean, except if your computer has a really, really terrible problem, but you can only have one cursor. I mean, Windows used to have that bug where you like see 3 cursors at the same time, and it used to spook me around. But you know, you only have one cursor. You can only focus on one thing at a time. So use that. And it's also important that a form gives you the ability to know when a user has interacted with a form field. You know, if I want to show a user an error message, for example, I wouldn't just put it out there in their face. I want to give them the chance to actually try to fill this. Then if they don't fill it properly, then I can show them the error message. I want to make sure that they've left and be like, hey, by the way, you've given me a nice password. It's really lovely, but I would really like you to, put an uppercase character or something like that. And they're like, okay, so you're kind of helping the user. Because guess what? How many of us here buy IKEA and actually read the manual on the first go? Yeah, Or how many of us here have bought a toy in the history of toys and read the manual to the toy? It's like we as human beings, we have this self-satisfaction where when we buy something, a machine, we want to figure it out. We want to feel like nice. We want to feel smart. Like, oh my God, I was able to figure this out. Even IKEA, which the whole point of IKEA is you're supposed to read the instructions. But a lot of us just buy, the first thing we do is we separate the nuts, and then we try to just figure it out like, yeah, I don't need this. It's sort of like when you go to like maybe a restaurant, and you go to the restroom, right? Everyone's been to a restroom here in the restaurant, I'm pretty sure. And you see those fancy knobs, and you're trying to figure it out, and you find yourself doing a little bit of yoga, because you just want to wash your hands, and and then you kind of just see the next person coming, you're like, oh, okay, you need to do this. But at that point in time, what would just be really nice is a simple tap that you can turn on and turn off, and that's what user experience is. It doesn't matter how fancy it is. If you're struggling to understand how it works, then it's already wrong, right? And sometimes this is when you have order. You need specific order. Say you need someone to put their postcode first so that you can see if you actually deliver to them or not, and that's more important. Then this pattern doesn't really matter. Then there's this one, and I'm pretty sure everybody has experienced this one before. That's why everyone hates taxes. Does anybody here in the history of computers like taxes? Good. We're all reasonable people in the crowd. Good stuff. This is it, where a form is very long, and it's like, you look at it and you're like, oh, I'm just going to do it when I get home. It's even worse when the form doesn't allow you to save, where it's like you have to fill everything. It's even further worse when the form has a timeout. Airline booking, where you fill the whole thing, and then you've given the information. It's like, oh, your session is expired, by the way. Start all over again. It's like, we've all been there. Exactly. Then there's another one. Ensure that I only have to submit only once, right? Don't want to waste your user's time. So I'm about to sign up to your new great application. So I put my username, man's not hot, and my name is Big Shaq, and I'm putting my password, right? But what I don't understand is man's not hot is a very popular term, so somebody's probably figured it out. It's sort of like the people that always make their password because they think they're very smart, and nobody else has figured that out. It's crazy. And guess what? The form goes to the server, comes back, and says it's taken. But guess what? All your information is exactly. You got to put it all over again. This, I think everyone has experienced at some point. So the reason why we have a lot of these terrible forms, it's not because developers are just awful. Sometimes we are, but it's really difficult to create really good forms. If you've worked with MVC forms, MVC was actually pretty cool. But if you worked with jQuery forms, then you would know what I'm talking about. Well, you're probably not here because you probably died young, which makes sense. Yeah, but you know what I'm talking about. It's really difficult. It's just so difficult to create great forms. So how can we create better forms in Angular? And that's where I will introduce you to Reactive Forms. So if you haven't worked with Angular, that's OK. Angular has two form libraries. There's the Reactive Forms library, and there's the other one which you should not use, which shall not be named, the you-know-who forms library, right? We shall not name it. So we're here talking about the Reactive Forms, which is basically built with RxJS and all the nice parts of observables and stuff. So let's talk about what the features of Reactive Forms, right? Reactive Forms allow you to observe. Basically, they give you an API to see what the user is actually doing. Is the user touching this field? Have they done this? Have they validated it? Have they fulfilled what I need them to fulfill? Is their email valid? Does the password contain these rules? Things like that. Even matching with regular expression, things like that. And then it also, this in turn allows you to be empathetic, because now you can really help your user fill this form. You can tell your user what they're doing wrong. Oh, by the way, I need you to make this password a little bit longer. It's nice, you've given me a password, it's cool, but I need you to make it a little bit longer because I want you to be secure, you know? And then you can also compose. We all work in companies where sometimes we need like really complex forms that we want to compose. The Reactive Forms library gives you the ability to do that, to have a bunch of input fields and create a relationship, right? And then sometimes we even want to go further. We have our own internal forms that we want to build. And the Reactive Forms allow you to extend that ability and create your own custom stuff. So let's have a quick look about the building blocks of Angular Reactive Forms. Everything is what we call an abstract control. This is like the abstract base class, right, of the Angular Reactive Forms library. And then you have the form control, which you're going to see shortly. We have the form group, and we have the form array. But every one of these members is what? An abstract control. So let's have a look at how we start using the Angular Reactive Forms. And if you haven't worked with Angular, this might look a little bit foreign, but it's more the concept that matters here. The first thing you do is you register your intent to use the Reactive Forms module by importing it from the Angular core, just like you do with every other module in Angular. And to use the form control is meant to be used on a one-to-one basis when you have just one input field that you want to associate the goodness of Reactive Forms with. And then you bind to it via the form control property, which is already made available by the imported module. So you bind that. So here you can see we're binding the form control to an instance called myFormControl. And in the class, the component class, we've instantiated that myFormControl to a new form control. And that gives you a lot of things you can do. The first parameter there is the initial value. Right here is just empty. But if this was like a form I was trying to build up, maybe I got some data from the server, that initial value could be a value I assign. Maybe I want someone to change their email address, so I would assign the initial value to the current email address. And then they can change that. And there's also like validators and stuff like that. And then you have the form group, which is the most popular one when you have like a proper form element. You may mostly work with it with the form element, and you use it to aggregate the group controls. And it provides what I call an object-based API. So you access that particular form group like an object. So it gives you an object-based API to have a cascade of controls. But here's the thing. Let's have a look at the code here. If you look at the code here, what we've done here is we've associated the form group with the instance of that form group that we created in the class on the right-hand side, right? And you can see in that form group, we're creating children, first name, last name. So each of those first name is also a form control. But here's the greatest part of the form group. It doesn't just have to be a form control. Every one of these members can be an abstract control. So each one of those members can be another form group that you can attach. You can really cascade and build hierarchies of these forms. That makes it really powerful. And you can see how here on the left-hand side, we've basically associated that form group, and then we have the form control name here. And we're saying associate this input with first name, which is basically the rules here, and so on and so forth. Then we have a third member. This is like the black sheep of the family that people rarely use. I have used it once or twice. It's called the form array. It's basically just like the form group, but it gives you an array-like syntax. So instead of like object-based API, you use index-based API, 0, 1, 2, to access those abstract controls that are children, right? Okay. So at this point in time, the final thing I'm going to show you is the declarative approach. I've shown you the imperative approach you instantiate, but sometimes that's just a lot of code. You can use the declarative approach to use a form builder and just give an object with the name and the keys here. And here you can see this array here. You can have a lot of things, validators, async validators, and all of that. You can make the form really, really smart. What the validators allow you to do is to set rules. So you can say, I need this form field for it to be valid. I need it to be maybe contain 8 characters long, right? And you can do that. And the form field will not be valid. You can check each of those abstract controls has a property called valid and invalid, right? And we're going to see that in the demo shortly. So By the way, I just happen to be a black Viking. You never knew there were black Vikings, right? Well, hello there. Look at that. Well, my defense is so terrible. I am so dying, like, exactly. So we're gonna do a little bit of demos here, just 3 demos. The first one is a value change. The second one is we're gonna see the built-in validation properties. The third one is composition, and how you compose. The fourth one is custom validation. And the last but not the least we're going to demo is the async validation. Anybody wanna see the demo? Are we ready? Okay. Let's go out here and, all right, screen's just gone blank, and I'm just gonna open Safari here. All right, so we have Safari. I'm going to start with the basic form control. By the way, do we make this larger, a little bit larger? Okay, 1, 2, good enough, or larger? Larger? Okay, 3, 4, good. All right, what about the code? 1, 2, 3, 4, good enough? Super. So here, what I've actually built is basically like a knockoff version of Twitter, right? I'm probably going to go to San Francisco and raise $10 billion by some VC, and they'll give it to me. Exactly. You should see the ideas that get funded in San Francisco, by the way. Crazy. So here you can see the form is giving me states: untouched, invalid, and pristine. Untouched means that this form, the user has not entered the form and left it. That's what it needs to be touched. Pristine means the initial value has not been altered. And invalid means the rules that you set for this to be valid have not been obeyed, right? And what I've done is I've actually, let's have a quick look at that quickly. So what I've done here is I've actually gone to if we go to the HTML, I have here on the button, the submit button on line 8, and I've attached the disabled property to the validity of the actual form control. So if that form control is invalid, the disabled button would be disabled. But when it's valid, it will be activated. So that means the user can never submit this form as long as my rules are not obeyed. So what are my rules here? Let's have a look at that quickly. I've basically created this form on line 18, this form control on line 18, and I've said initial value is empty, but for this form to be valid, who can guess what I'm asking it to do? On line 18, who can guess? Based on that.
Submit unless the required fields are entered?
Exactly. That field is required. That means it must have some value. For a tweet to be a tweet, you can't tweet like empty. Oh my God, so a lot of people would have had a lot of tweets if that was the case. It has to have something. And I'm also using the observable here to get the count. And as the value is changing, I'm also able to get the count. So let's go and play with it. So here, I could come here and say, winter is definitely here. And you can see that it's still untouched. It still is now valid. Why is it valid? There's a property. But now it's dirty, which means the initial value has changed. But it's still untouched. But as soon as I leave this form field, now it's touched. So now you can tell that a user has interacted. So if this was an error you were trying to give the user, that's when you would want to show the user the error, like, hey, I see what you did there, but now this is what I need you to do. And now you can see the tweet button is suddenly active. And if I just remove all of this, the tweet button is disabled. So it's automatically watching for changes. You don't have to do absolutely anything. And as simple as that, just 4 or 5 lines of code, you can build a very simple functionality here with form control. So that's more of like a starter. Let's see something a little bit more complex, right? Okay, so here, 1, 2, right? Can everybody see that? Okay, we have this form field where I have an email, a password, and a confirm password. And you can see the states of every single field there. Why is it invalid? Let's go and investigate why it's actually invalid. So here we can see it. It is invalid because, first of all, every single one of those is valid, is required. And for the email, we actually need you to enter a valid email, something that follows the email specification. So if those 2 validators do not fulfill, that field is invalid. And if the field is invalid, the form group itself is invalid. For the form group to be valid, every single member has to be valid. So let's go and see this. So let's go and make this valid here. Quickly, if we do that, I'm going to say, Tyrion@lannister.com. Okay? And for this password, I'm going to say 123, right? It's valid. But what happens when I do 321? This is a tricky one, right? Because technically, 123 is valid because I provided a value. 321 is also valid. But would I want the user to be able to submit this form? No, because I want to make sure they match. And that's when you need to create something called a custom validator. But not just on the form control level, on the group level. And let's have a look at that. So what I've done here is I've created a validator on line 27 on the group value. I'm saying, perform this extra check. And it's just a function I've created that's going to inject the instance of that form group for me. And I'm saying, get the member called password and get the member called confirm password and match their values. If their values match, then we're good. Just return null, undefined, nothing to see here, right? Well, we're all good. But if they don't, return an error called password match, true. So it's interesting, it's like a reverse Boolean. And now that's what allows this form group here to then check and display this error saying passwords don't match. And quickly, if we look at the HTML here, how are we displaying that error? All we've done is we're saying, when this particular form group has the error called password match, remember what we returned in the error. If that password match error exists, that means that particular stuff has happened. That's when I want you to show this error. But also, I'm doing some things like making sure that you have touched the two fields. I don't want to show you an error when you haven't interacted with both fields. So you can provide great user experience. So quickly, and again, this is all valid online, available online. Then the final thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you a very nice async validator. Async validators allow you to make asynchronous requests. Sometimes maybe you need to consult something. You need to do some long-running thing to ensure the validity of your form field. For example, if I want to put my username called man's not hot, what would be nice is if I'm able to go to the database of all my usernames to see if that's available so that I can provide you the feedback ahead of time, or maybe even secure it for a minute. That's what airlines would do. Okay, you're looking for this particular seat. That seat is available. I'm going to reserve it for you, and I give you maybe 2 minutes to complete this. You can do that and wait for the validity to be calculated, right? So what I've built here is a simple form. I'm basically building a new version of Amazon, but here's my view. It's very elitist. If you don't live in Melbourne or you don't live in Sydney, I'm not delivering to you. So sorry if you live in Brisbane, or sorry if you live in Perth. Sorry, definitely not in Tasmania. That's too far. The economics doesn't work. So does anybody have a non-Sydney postcode? Yes, sir. 7,000. 7000. Okay, we don't deliver to your hood. We deliver to Sydney and Melbourne only. That's what it says. All right, anybody else? Sir? 4151. 4151. We don't deliver to you too. Does anybody actually live in the elitist part of town that I deliver to? Anyone live in Melbourne?
3,750.
Oh, there's a lot of postcodes. 3,050. So 3750. We deliver to you, sir. Yeah. Okay. We definitely do. And anybody else? One more maybe from Sydney or from, I guess, Victoria or New South Wales. Anyone? Well, that's good enough. So let's actually see the code for this. How does this work? So this might seem like it's just some hard-coded stuff, but actually not. I'm using an API called zippopotamus.us. And Australia is one of the supported countries where you can make an API request, send somebody zip code, and you get a bunch of information, and you can check their states, their cities. So I'm saying, if this person here does not actually live in New South Wales, their state, or Victoria, then forget about it. I don't want their money. Just want the Sydney. So sorry. I'm okay. But this is just an example, and this is just like the other validator that we saw. On line 22, you can see what we call a custom async validator. And we're injecting the instance of HTTP. If you don't know what HTTP is, that's what allows you to make REST API calls in Angular. So that's like Axios or the Fetch API wrapper. so you can inject the things that it needs ahead of time. You can declare that. And what we're doing here is we're just making that API call. And if everything is OK, we just return, it's all good. But if it's not OK, we catch the error using observables and just return that what we're delivering here. And if something goes wrong, we just say we're unable to verify the state. But this allows us to then make a real API HTTP call, an asynchronous call, to watch for the validity of this form. I really, really think that's a very powerful feature. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of what you can do with Angular Reactive Forms. There's so much more, and trust me, 30, 40 minutes is not even close. All right? OK. So I'm going to quickly go back to the slides. And I'm just going to make this full screen. OK. So we've seen the value changed, the built-in validation, the current position, the custom validation, and the custom async validation features. Right. Now, for you to get started, you might want to get started. You can always go to my StackBlitz, and you see all the demos, every single one of them available on my StackBlitz for free. Well, I was never going to make you pay for it anyways, but yeah, I don't know why I said for free. It's available online. And you can go to the Angular guide for the reactive forms. That's a great place to start as well. And maybe you want to ask me a question, go on my Twitter, feel free. I'm very controversial on this, so be careful. Yes, thread carefully. I did warn you. But feel free, my DMs are open, so you don't have to follow me. You can just hit me a message like, hey, dude, answer this question. I would be like, no. But yeah, you can send a question to me. And if you would like to learn in person as well, if you're in Europe or wherever we are with Angular Bootcamp, also feel free to hit me up. But without further ado, I'd like to say Nagode, which is how you say thank you in a language called Hausa, West African language that I do speak. And I welcome all the questions now. Thank you very much. I don't know if we have time for questions. Do we?
We've got at least one.
OK.
Hey, so my question is basically, with the validators, say, for example, you're putting in a password that needs to match, have an uppercase letter and a special character. Mm-hmm. How do you tie in the specific validations that are failing to your form control? Like, can you attach a message to a specific validator so it fails and gives that message?
Absolutely. So if you look at when you have time to go through the examples, that's kind of what we did for the async validator. You're able to, so the object you return, the key is actually the name of the error. And the value is the error itself. So you'd be checking for that key. So the built-in ones required, they all use that name. But the password match that we did, actually what I was returning was password match true. So I was able to say has error. There's a has error function, and you pass in password match, and that would give you that specific error you're looking for. So yes, you can absolutely do that. Yes.
So we've got a question on Slack.
Yes.
If you absolutely have to collect a lot of information, what techniques are there to avoid making a form?
If you want to collect a lot of information, but you also want to avoid forms.
Long form.
Long forms. Well, that's actually more of a user experience question. But when you have a long form, it's very good to segment it. It's just much easier, right, to segment it. Like when you're signing up, right, you segment it. OK, give me this information now. It's two things, segment and also allow save of state, like persistence. So allow the users to complete this form at their own time. Right? It doesn't matter how long a user takes to give you the information. As long as they give you the information, then you're good, except if the information is completely mandatory. So I would say segment the form and break it down. That way, each page or each segment can be like its own form group. Then you can have a big form group that ties in everything to glance if it's all valid. That's what I would say. Do we have time for one more? Or?
Do we have any more? Okay, I reckon that's going to be tea break. Thank you very much then.
Pleasure is all mine. Thank you, Melbourne.
So we'll be back in half an hour. Go and have one of the last cups of coffee for the day, I guess. The two talks are going to be on Angular Universal and deploying React Native. See you soon.